My name is Nesti Timoshina. I work in traffic, and I'm here to talk to you about why wild plants matter and how to save them. I work for Traffic, which is a wildlife trade monitoring network. Traffic is a non-governmental organization, and we're based in Cambridge in the UK. This is where our headquarters are. Traffic's mission is to ensure that the trade in wild plants and animals is not a threat to the conservation of nature. As you can see from the map, Traffic is a true network. So every blue dot on the map is where Traffic have various offices. And the really interesting thing about it is that our offices are located both in places where wildlife, so wild plants and animals, are sourced, where they transition through trade, as well as where they're consumed. So I work with a fascinating network of over 150 colleagues all around the world in doing my job. So let's think about plants a bit. I have a picture here of a few fascinating species. I don't know if you can recognize any of them. They are fascinating in many different ways, and one thing that connects them all is that they're useful for health, they're for food, they're useful for people as something we use for medicine or cosmetics or food, and this is going to be a little bit a theme of this lecture as well. So you might not actually recognize them when they're presented like this, but different type of picture. So for instance, I could show you this picture. It might not look familiar, but I could tell you that it actually is Euphorbia species, harvested in many different places, in Mexico in particular, and the Candelilla wax, so Euphorbia antisyphilitica wax, is used as a very common ingredient, for example, in lipsticks. Here is another fascinating plant. This is a shea nut. A lot of you, I'm sure, know that if you go to Boots, if you go to a cosmetic shop, you can buy creams or shower gels that contain shea butter in them. But actually, another fascinating thing about this plant is that majority of shea nuts that are harvested around the world are used in chocolate as a cocoa butter equivalent, so as a supplement or instead of the cocoa beans. Here is another example, something that looks like a bark, I'm sure you think. This is agarwood, so species of tree, and they're used, for example, in perfumery. This is a photo of the Prunus africana, or African cherry, that grows all over Africa and is a very important ingredient for medicine. So where do we start this presentation for real? So the wild plants are a resource under pressure. We estimate that roughly around 30,000 species, so 28,000 species, have well-documented uses in terms of their use for medicinal and aromatic purposes. It means that the plant has a recorded use, and it's used as medicine, as used as food, as used in aromatherapy, or other purposes similarly useful for humans. Roughly 10% of this species are traded internationally. It means they're harvested in one country and then they move across the border to be used as ingredient in a different product in a different country. And a fascinating thing about this stats as well is that majority of these plants that are in trade are sourced through wild harvest. So rather than being cultivated, these plants are wild harvested. But how threatened are they? So a big issue is that we don't actually know a lot about this question. Only about 7% of those 28,000 species have been assessed against the extinction threat criteria. And what we know for this 7% is that 1 in 5 of these species have been assessed as threatened with extinction in the wild. A really big question mark, of course, is that for majority of these plants, we don't know how threatened they may be. And this is making it difficult to develop interventions, to develop action plans in order to make sure that they use sustainably in the long term. Something that is another issue is the growing and diversifying trade in medicinal and aromatic plants. Here, I'd really like, I think you pay attention to the direction of the trade, so maybe less so the absolute figures, because those are changing, and actually they're probably quite an underestimate of what actually is known about the trade in these resources. But we know that, for example, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, the trade in medicinal and aromatic plants have been growing very fast, in particular because there is a growing demand in new markets, new consumer markets, new industries. If you are in the shop, you can find a lot of food supplements, a lot of cosmetic products that claim to contain natural ingredients, and this fuels the demand for this plant as well. We're facing a range of challenges around the trade in wild plants. So on one hand, there is increasing demand and this very complex trade chains, and I'll give you an example of this in a minute. Also, wild harvesting is often done by some of the poorest people in the country where they live. They are often marginalized. They often don't have access to the arable land that they could grow their food or medicines. And so wild harvesting for them is an important source of income. In some places around the world, we see the decline in collectors' numbers and the loss of traditional knowledge and practices on how to do it sustainably, how to do it the right way. And you could think, well, actually, that's probably a good thing if there are less collectors that are going and harvesting the plants. But actually, it's not a direct correlation, not a direct connection. Actually, having less people with traditional knowledge of how to do things sustainably could also mean that there is more harvesting that happens in an unsustainable way. A lot of this trade is informal and underreported, and it operates in a complex regulatory environment. What this means is that legislation or the rules about how to access the resource, how to collect it, how to trade it can be very complex. And also each of us have a role to play in these challenges. In general, consumers and public is very ignorant about wild plant ingredients in everyday products. And part of this presentation and our follow-up discussion is actually to try and tackle this through you. So a little stop here to think about the trade chains of wild plants. And this is a very simple example of something that all of you, I'm sure, would know. It's a dandelion root, Taraxacum officinalis. It's used extensively in herbal products and medicinal products that people consume. This example is starting at point 1 in Poland, where it's wild harvested by collectors group. And what this diagram is meant to show is a very straightforward trade chain. But even then, if you follow the arrows, you can see that it moves through a number of different companies as the production cycle goes, and also that it's changing quite a number of countries. So from Poland it goes to Germany, from Germany it goes to France for processing, then it goes back to Germany, to United States, and then finally it's actually retailed and distributed worldwide as a final product. This is a very, very simple trade chain. A lot of them are a lot more complicated with products changing hands lots of times. So it's very difficult actually to keep track of how sustainable the harvesting is and whether what you're buying in the shop actually comes from a particular place that you want it to come from. But then there are a lot of really positive opportunities with the trade in wild plants. We can see that the sustainability and fair trade market awareness is growing. I think for all of you, for me, I can see this going in the shop and seeing the existence of the fair trade products that I can buy. Companies themselves seem to be a lot more interested in the product origins, the traceability, which means that you're able to trace back a particular product or ingredient to where it comes from, and also the stories that these products tell. And we'll think a little bit more about this in a minute. There are best practices, so sustainable wild harvesting and trade in plants is possible. So what we need is that these best practices are used more. And also the legislative frameworks are evolving and becoming more incentivizing the good behavior by all the different actors along the trade chains. Plants are also really interesting in terms of their connection to animals and people. And in that, they have something that I call landscape level conservation potential. What I mean by it is that plants are growing in landscapes or in habitats where other species live, other species of plants, but also some charismatic animals like giant pandas or tigers or elephants. And there are quite a lot of opportunities, I think, around developing programs and projects around sustainable harvesting of plants, which also benefit those charismatic species. And in the long term, lead to the wildlife conservation and landscape conservation. So we're doing a number of different things in response to all these challenges and opportunities. I will focus in particular on one of them, which is around developing a system called FairWild, which is a standard and a certification scheme for sustainability of wild harvested plants. But also we work with governments. Quite often, we'd be engaging with the government, helping them to develop legislation that regulates the trade in plants. We're also working quite a lot with intergovernmental agencies. And what it means is bodies, organizations that coordinate various countries and are the decision-making bodies for big decisions to be made around at international level. So an example of this is Convention for Biological Diversity, which is a main agency that is dealing with the biodiversity conservation. Some strong opportunities in there. That means that quite often I'd be going to a large meeting and where we try to engage with governments and other stakeholders to influence how they formulate the decisions so that they're good for nature and good for people. FairWild. I've mentioned this already. FairWild standard is a set of guidelines that allows to verify sustainable and fair sourcing practices in wild harvested supply chains. You see a little definition in there as well. A couple of things that are useful to note about FairWild. So FairWild is a set of guidelines, is a set of rules of how what you'd want to follow if you wanted to demonstrate that the production practices that you follow are sustainable. And is based on a few very important elements. I'm only going to give example of one. So, for example, resource assessment. Resource assessment means that if you're looking at the area where plants are collected, you really need to understand how much of this particular plant is available in this area. So you'd want to estimate that, inventorize it, and then also develop harvesting practices based on this. So that includes the quantity that you can take away without compromising the sustainability of the whole population, but also it's about particular harvesting methods and when during the year or during the cycle of the growth of the plant it can be sustainably harvested. So that's an example of what FairWild is built on, but there are a lot of different elements to it. And it is applied through a number of different elements as well. I'm going to talk in particular about the certification certification as a market mechanism. And what it means is that you require a business partner, so you require a company that would actually be supporting the certification, but they would have the benefit of putting a label on the product, for instance. And so this map is illustrating where in the world various projects that I'm involved in to different extent are. The points in orange are the FairWild certification sites, so from where the ingredients are coming that are actually certified, and it means that somebody goes and checks whether company complies with the requirements. And in blue, it's different projects that we are working on with various partners on ensuring that plants harvesting is sustainable and people are benefiting right. You can also see little shopping carts on the map. One of them is in the UK, and it's because UK, just like a lot of other countries, is some of the really important markets. So where a lot of these products that contain wild plants are consumed. So it's all of us that are responsible in making sure that the trade in them is sustainable. And to give you some examples of products that are FairWild certified, there is a number of herbal teas that are available on the market. There are some cosmetic products like lipstick that contains baobab oil. There is gin even that contains FairWild certified juniper berries. To give you an example of what a FairWild project look like in practice, we're working in India with a local partner in a very important ecosystem where there are these majestic trees called Terminalia species. They're very large. They have large hollow trees, and those hollow trees are also perfect for nesting sites for two species of hornbills, some beautiful birds, and of course very important for conservation. In this project, we've been engaging with local partner, and they've been engaging communities which have essentially replaced their income that they would normally generate from cutting the trees. From cutting the trees, they could earn quite a bit of money, but then of course you can only do it once, and it's not good for conservation. So instead of cutting the trees, they collect the fruits of the tree and they're selling them to a company, and through earning this additional money through receiving premium price, they have the incentive to keep the trees growing and standing. And standing trees means that hornbills are also preserved. And there is a sustainable livelihood opportunities for collectors. So a really beautiful, really interesting win-win-win situation for conservation of trees, for conservation of birds, as well as for the benefits of people on the ground. And of course, these products are going into the final herbal products that you can buy in the UK on the market. And so all of us are benefiting at the end of it. Actually, if you are when the quarantine and lockdown is over, and if you are visiting Cambridge Botanic Garden, there is a tree of Terminalia bilierica from this project site that you can find in the gardens as well. Maybe that's a challenge for you next time. I'm going to skip through this, but it's another example for something that is probably a plant that you know. You might like it or not like it. It's licorice root. It's also mostly wild collected, and there are some FairWild certified sites in 3 places in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, and Spain. So at the moment, this is where we are so far with the FairWild certification and supporting this program. There is 20 species of plants that are currently certified from 11 different countries, and that's something you've seen on the map. You can buy products on the market, and we are trying to engage as many companies as you can. So what can you do about all this, and how can you support this? I guess one of the really important ways how you can be involved is because you, as well as me, and everyone else around are a consumer of wild plant ingredients. And this is through medicinal products, through health supplements, through cosmetics, homeware, food and drink. A number of different ingredients are contained in day-to-day products, and I would almost be prepared to have a bet that you've actually had wild plant in product today already, maybe in a tea or in food or in your shampoo. So there are we've got a quiz at Why Go Wild website, and I'll show you how it looks in a moment. You can engage with something that we called Fair Wild Week, which is going to run on social media. So we have Instagram and Twitter account, and we welcome anyone to join in June, but also through the year to support this mission and to speak about wild plants and wild plant ingredients. As a consumers, we can all make smart purchasing decisions to look for the Fair Wild logo, but even if there is no Fair Wild logo, we can be asking companies we buy from where their wild source products come from. So back to this quiz. If you go to the whygowild.com, there is a button in here to test your knowledge, where you can test your knowledge about wild plants and wild plant ingredients. Some of the products that quite frequently have wild plant ingredient in them include herbal teas, fizzy drinks, chewing gum, lip balms, shampoos, body balms, actually quite a wide range of products. An example that you see in front of you here on the slide is something called E414. It's a gum arabic, so it's a wild plant that's harvested from the wild. It's a thickener, used as thickener, and it's actually very often used in the chewing gums. Chocolate is another good place to look out for wild plant ingredients, and what you can probably find quite frequently is that it would have shea butter in them, which is often listed as simply shea. And thank you very much for your attention.